Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today, presented by Capital One. I'm Jamie, that's Dave, that's Heath. We're looking at the sits for week number 11. Players you should be avoiding in your lineups. And Dave, you're up first. Let's start with the 5 guys that you're telling people to avoid for this week. You're not telling people to avoid 5 guys because we like that food. Russell Wilson headlines the list. Michael Carter, DJ Moore, Darnell Mooney, and Kyle Pitts. So we've been teasing this Russell Wilson conversation because we've said we like Cortland Sutton, we like Greg Dulcich. No Jerry Jeudy potentially at this point. Why are you avoiding Russell Wilson against the Raiders?
First of all, now you got me thinking about cheeseburgers, so thank you very much for that. Second of all, I just don't want to trust Russell Wilson if I can help it, but I will say he's a streamer just because of the matchup against Las Vegas. They've been terrible. They've pressured quarterbacks at the lowest rate this year. They've allowed, I think it's 20-plus fantasy points to every quarterback except one, including Russell Wilson, who had 3 touchdowns back in Week 4. I just hate what this offensive line looks like. I hate what this offense looks like. Russell Wilson isn't playing well, seems sensitive to pressure. He's off target just a little bit. If I can start Daniel Jones, if I can start Jimmy Garoppolo ahead of him, I'm doing that in a heartbeat. I've debated Russell Wilson and Zach Wilson this week. And in my mind, I just can't get past Zach Wilson against Belichick and Russell Wilson against the Raiders. I'm going to go with Russ there. So he's top 15 for me, but not top 12. Not a guy who's a must start.
This is my favorite stat that I've heard all week. Hit me with it again. You said it now 3 times, and I love it every time I hear it.
Patrick Mahomes leads the NFL all-time in passer rating, 105.8. Quarterbacks versus the Raiders this season have a passer rating of 107. The greatest quarterback of all time, quarterbacks against the Raiders this season.
That's funny.
I mean, again,
I don't think Russ is going to have a quarterback rating quite that high. I think he can be okay. I think he can get you 18 fantasy.
He already did once. Well, you mentioned 18 fantasy points. You said the one quarterback didn't. It was Trevor Lawrence. He's the only one not to get to 20 fantasy points. He got 18. So that's the low against the Raiders so far this season.
It would suck if he didn't do it. If he doesn't do it, you can't trust him ever again. And I'm talking to you, Nathaniel Hackett.
Russell Wilson's passer rating in Week 4 at Las Vegas, 124.9.
I mean, it's just ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous.
It's a terrible defense, for sure.
Talk to me about DJ Moore here and why we're avoiding him again.
This doesn't have to do with DJ Moore. This has to do with his quarterback, and it's Baker Mayfield. When they played together, 43 targets to DJ Moore, 19 catches, 215 yards, 1 touchdown, a 44% catch rate. And it's not like DJ Moore's dropping passes all over the place. These are off-target throws because Baker Mayfield isn't good at throwing the football anymore. And now he's taking on a Ravens team that's going to pressure the snot out of him. It's going to be an ugly game. This Ravens defense is going to stand strong. I do not want to use DJ Moore even as a number 3 receiver this week.
Surprised that Sportsline is very high on DJ Moore. He's averaged 8.5 PPR points per game in 4 starts with Baker Mayfield. Darnell Mooney is a guy that's been all over the place. Dave, why are we avoiding him this week?
And you really said it. He followed up his best game of 2022 with one of his worst since September last week, 9 PPR points on 4 targets. Jamie, you bring this up every time I talk about target share in Chicago. He's just not getting enough. He's had 2 games this year with 7 or more targets. Those are his 2 best games. I think Chicago runs the ball a little bit, and I don't want to scare people off of Justin Fields because I think he could still run for a touchdown himself. But I think you're going to see David Montgomery get a lot of work. I think Atlanta's going to run the ball too. Going to be a low-volume passing game on both sides. That spells trouble for Darnell Mooney, flex at best.
All right, Heath, let's transition now to your sits. Derek Carr, I don't think you want to trust him unless maybe he's playing his own defense. But no DeAndre Swift, no Isaiah Pacheco, no Adam Thielen, no Allen Robinson. Swift is interesting because the name still carries a lot of weight. The touches, however, do not. Now, there's the scenario at play of Jamal Williams dealing with the illness. But let's assume that he plays. Is DeAndre Swift even the second best running back in Detroit?
He's not the third down back, apparently. Justin Jackson taking over that role. They basically played the same number of snaps last week. You look at his touches since Week 1. Week 1, he had 18 touches for 175 yards. Since that, 7, 10, 10, 5, 7. That is not a starting running back. It's not really even a flex in most cases. Because the Giants have been so bad against the run, and because Swift does have the pedigree of DeAndre Swift, I understand why some people might want to flex him. I really don't want to.
The Giants, if you're hoping for him to make plays in the passing game, the fewest receptions allowed to running backs, only 23 on the season. And so that's not an area where you're going to find some success. So Jamal Williams, while he's going to need to score, is the better of the two because he's going to get the volume. He's not going to do a lot of work in the passing game either, not that he's been doing that anyway. So this is a team that just locks down pass-catching running backs. So if you're hoping for that passing game bump from DeAndre Swift, this is not the week to rely on that. Adam Thielen has been very disappointing of late. He's still getting 7+ targets. But now since TJ Hawkinson's been on the field, it's been disappointing production. Another week of that?
I think it's probably another week of that. He's a touchdown-dependent flex, and he has really not been scoring touchdowns. Now, I think that will regress at some point. I expect he's going to score a couple more touchdowns this season. It's tough to bet on which weeks he's going to do that. Right now, he's just living in that 9 to 10 fantasy point range. You don't really want to start that in this game against the Cowboys.
Getting a lot of questions, obviously, about no Cooper Kupp and what's going to be the replacement options for the Rams. So Allen Robinson is the name that carries the most weight. Van Jefferson is there. Maybe you get some other production. Clearly, Tyler Higbee is somebody we like, but mostly because of the position he plays. So Robinson, no boost enough, or not enough of a boost without Kupp there to trust him?
In a 3-wide receiver league where you have to start a flex, I might consider starting Allen Robinson. Other than that, I don't want any part of him. The guy could not get open when defenses were sending 3 defenders Cooper Kupp away. I don't know how he's going to get open in this situation. His quarterback's not good. His offense has been one of the worst in football with Cooper Kupp. I think it is the worst in football for the rest of this season.
Could be very tough for everybody there. You should pick up Van Jefferson just to see what happens. And if you have Allen Robinson, just hold him just again to see what happens. Stafford being back is a benefit, but again, just tough to trust. Sits for me, you got Marcus Mariota, and the reason he's on this list is because everybody was a little excited because coming off a strong game against Chicago, I think they're just going to run. I really just think it's going to be a game where they look at what's happened to them the last few weeks and say, even if we're behind, we're running. Even if we're winning, we're running. Marcus, you're not throwing. And if he's throwing, he could be getting benched for Desmond Ridder. Najee Harris, Damian Harris. If your last name is Harris, you're probably sitting for me. Deontay Johnson and Brandon Cooks. In terms of Najee Harris, look, it's hard to get away from a guy that just had 20 carries for 99 yards. But there was empty production. We only get 9 points for that. That's in any format. No catches last week. Jalen Warren's doing a better job catching the ball for the Steelers. And Najee Harris now facing a Bengals defense with DJ Reader back. The run defense is much tougher. So could be a tough situation there for him. We'll stay with the Steelers there. Deontay Johnson, we had the conversation today. You still trust him as a number 3 receiver in 3 receiver leagues. The targets are just going away. And I think, again, this is going to be a game the Steelers try to make it ugly. They try to limit the pass attempts for Kenny Pickett. They certainly try to limit the pass attempts for Joe Burrow. I just don't see the volume there for Deontay Johnson. I don't know if you guys share the same sentiment.
Well, you might be sitting Najee Harris, but the Steelers will not. They're going to try and use him. They're going to try and run the ball, shorten the game, kind of like what you were just talking about. And I think George Pickens has been the more explosive receiver almost all year long. Even in games where Deontay Johnson has had double-digit targets, he's come through for like 10, 11 PPR fantasy points. That's low-end flex-worthy. You can't take that away from him. I'd start him over Adam Thielen, but we're talking about guys that you drafted with a top 60 pick that you can't feel good about starting anymore.
I don't know what to take away from last week, because last week's really when the targets disappeared. He was still 9 or 10 targets before the bye. They threw 30 passes. He only had 5 targets. That was still the most targets any wide receiver had. It was one more than what George Pickens had. So I still expect if they get into a game where they're throwing it 35 or 40 times, his target share is going to be where it's been for most of the year, and he's going to see 8, 9, 10 targets.
There is one more thing. We know that the Bengals secondary, especially at cornerback, they've taken on some injuries, so there might be some opportunities there for Deontay Johnson to be decent this week and get to that 10 or 11 PPR
Believe me,
point
I
game.
would love to be. This is the reverse jinx. Sit Deontay Johnson. He has a big game. We get Deontay Johnson that we draft the rest of the season. Let's start right here. But again, can't trust him though. Just been very, very
It's hard.
tough season. No touchdowns so far on the year.